Thank you for putting on this wonderful event. I really enjoyed the last Go Ahead Exchange and really encouraged a lot of our customers and people internally within our company to come and attend because I found it to be so informative and valuable. Well, that's enough about me. I wanted to introduce our speaker today and make sure we have plenty of time to hear what he has to say. Tom Fishburne, I met last night, and I was introduced to him a few weeks ago by email, so I got to see the work that he does on his website, tomfishburne.com. You can go to it afterwards, and it's really, really unique, and I think that he's got a lot of great insight into how we, as companies, I think there's a lot of scientists and engineers and chemists and researchers and biologists in this room, how you can communicate about the ideas that we have, because everybody's probably heard it said that you can build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door. Well, I don't really think that's true, because if you never tell anybody that you have the better mousetrap, then they'll never come to your door. So how do we communicate about the great products that we have is really important. So a little bit about Tom. He started cartooning at the Harvard Business School, and probably to the chagrin of his professors, and just began to build upon that. So he spent about 16 years in marketing and innovation at several companies in US and Europe, most recently with Method Products, a cleaning company, VP, which was named the 16th most innovative company in the world by Fast Company. He is the founder and CEO of Marketunist, which is a content marketing agency, helps businesses like Unilever, Electronic Arts, if you like video games, Kronos and Wall Street Journal communicate with cartoons. So he has a wide reach and a great audience. He told me last night that about 100,000 people receive and look at his content regularly. Hopefully that's 100,220 or whoever's assembled here today after his presentation. So with that, Tom.
Great, good morning everyone. It's great to be here. I am used to being the only cartoonist speaking at an event, but it's not as usual to be the only one without a PhD. So I'm going to make the best of this connection. But what I think that PhDs and cartoonists and everyone in this room have in common is that we all, in some way, shape, and form, are responsible for coming up with ideas and then bringing those ideas to life. And I think a lot of what Go Ahead Exchange is all about is getting together with different colleagues and peers and exchanging ideas, and then going back into your organizations and then figuring out how to make those ideas happen. And so that's a bit what I want to talk about today. We all know the image, the classic image of Isaac Newton sitting under the apple tree, waiting for the apple to fall. That's the idea. And we often think about that as our metaphor for innovation. We go away to a brainstorming meeting, we go away to an event like this, and we look for insights, we look for ideas. But what's often overlooked is what can happen after an event like this. So I want you to think a little bit about later this week and next week when you're back in your organizations, because sometimes that path can look a little bit more like this. You find yourself walking into a world that's a little less friendly than the environment in a brainstorming meeting. You walk through a very circuitous maze that may have minotaurs or the VP of No or a skeleton in the bottom right with ideas from ideations long past. And it can be tricky sometimes because we go to events like this to be stimulated and creative and to set aside our critical thinking, to be creative. But what happens sometimes is when you go into organizations, the critical thinking turns right on. And the critical thinking is a good thing. It's an essential part of idea creation. But what sometimes happens in the critical thinking is that the creativity isn't always there. And you find out this apple that has dropped on Newton's head, slowly there's some chomps that come out of it and potentially some sacrifices as the idea gets ready to take to market. And at the end of the day, rather than Newton's apple, you have Newton's applesauce. And it can be sometimes a watered down version of the original idea. And another way of thinking about this is that we will have an idea and there may be voices in an organization as you bring the idea to life. Too risky, too different, too provocative, too unconventional, too unfamiliar, too untested, too unfeasible, too expensive. Wait, where's the point of difference? And at the end of the day, the point of difference is what really matters. It's the most important thing there is about an idea. Because if you launch ideas that don't have a very meaningful point of difference, it's never going to have the impact. And marketing can't save that. You know, we talked about building a better mousetrap and the world will be the path to your door. I don't think that's true, but I also think sometimes there's the feeling that if you build anything, it's the marketing's job to introduce that idea. We live in a very marketing-rich social media world where there are like us on Facebook buttons on just about everything. But the thing is, you can't make, you have to have something worth liking to begin with. You can't just put a like us on Facebook button. You can't just market something that doesn't have a remarkable point of difference at the start and then expect that it will be well received by an audience. You have to start with something remarkable at the core. And when you do that, when you have something remarkable at the core and you put it out into the world, it can be such a tremendous advantage. You can find yourself with consumers who live in a very cluttered world with marketing messages and advertising messages of all stripe. Often what they're influenced by is not what's being marketed to them. It's something, this I'll have what she's having moment. And that happens, that word of mouth moment happens only when there's a remarkable story to share. And when you have that, it's tremendously powerful. I'm going to talk today using a lot of consumer examples, although I know many of you in this room, most of you in this room work in the business-to-business environments. And the reason I do that is because I think the greatest opportunity for Omega-3 is to think about the consumer in everything that we do. And to think about everybody in this organization, no matter what your specialty background or whatever, that you all in this room work in marketing. That marketing is too important to be left to the marketing department. And that if we all see ourselves as working in marketing and creating things that can have an impact in consumers' lives and drive that I'll have what she's having moment, then you'll find yourself growing the category even faster than it's already growing. Because the competition surrounded on this wall back here are not other omega-3 companies. It's dietary habits at large. So it's not share of market, it's share of diet that's the bigger opportunity. And when you can create these moments, it grows the category because it inspires people to think about what omega-3s are. So a quick background about me, only because I don't have the traditional background of a cartoonist. I started drawing cartoons, as Dan mentioned, at Harvard Business School, and then I found myself at General Mills. And I had a great experience at Harvard Business School. I had a student paper. At General Mills, I didn't have a student paper anymore, so I just started a snarky marketing cartoon and sent it out to 20 friends and had an email sign up. And now it's about 100,000 people a week who get this cartoon. But I basically would make fun of the things that went on in marketing. And my first job was working at Cheerios, looking at their heart health strategy, thinking about functional foods, thinking about health claims. So I'm familiar with a lot of the world that you guys work in. And then I went on to work at Yoplait and Green Giant, eventually moved to Nestle and spent some time at Haagen-Dazs. And then while in that journey within some larger organizations, I started to notice a funny little brand called Method. And I'm just curious, how many of you have heard of Method? So I know there are a lot of international people, so maybe not that many of you. It's a brand that started a little over 10 years ago. A couple of guys started it in a Victorian house in San Francisco. And it's a cleaning brand. It's not the sexiest category in the world, but these guys in San Francisco looked at the cleaning market and they thought it needed to be shaken up. So they launched this cleaning brand literally out of their house. And 10 years later, it's $100 million in their sales. So they've made a real dent in this category. And I first noticed them when I walked into my local Target and I found a dish soap bottle that looked like what that guy's holding right there. And it was the strangest looking dish soap bottle I've ever seen. It would look like a big bowling pin. It was inverted, and you picked it up and you squeezed out the dish soap from the bottom. But it was the type of thing that made you stop and look at it, and then made you want to have it on your sink. And when I saw this, I was inspired by it, and then I went back to General Mills, and every single innovation meeting I went to, somebody kept bringing in this bottle of dish soap. I was like, what is up with this? And how big is this company? Where do they come from? And then when I researched it, I found out that there were just a couple of guys working in this house in San Francisco. And so I drew this cartoon as a cover letter of sorts, saying, I like what you guys are doing, and I'm inspired. The reference I made in this cartoon is the famous 1984 Apple computer ad, they only ran once, about Apple taking on IBM as Big Blue. And I was inspired by these guys shaking up the category and looking at it differently. And I ended up spending 5 years at Method, and what I learned there was not that they were innovative because of the virtue of their ideas. They were innovative because how they made their ideas happen in a remarkable way. And they didn't have a bottle of dish soap that started at looking like that at the concept stage, and that by the time it's on the shelves, it looks like everything else in the category. And so that's the main thing I want to talk about today, is how to capture the real spark of your ideas when you get them to market. There's a wonderful quote from the founder of Geek Squad that advertising is a tax for unremarkable thinking. And so we used to say this a lot at Method because it made us, rather than feel broke, we felt undertaxed. And it was sort of a little bit of mental jujitsu. But what it forced us to do in everything that we did, because we had no marketing budget to speak of. We once calculated that our major competitors spent more on toilet paper for their employees in their company office than our entire marketing budget. And so when you have that kind of effect, it forces you to think about things differently. Geek Squad, incidentally, the founder who gave that last quote, is such a great example of that. So they're in the world of IT support. It's not the most exciting industry in the world, but they thought, while we're sending out people to people's homes, we're going to make them as ambassadors of this brand. Everyone wears these uniforms that look like NASA from the 1950s or Dragnet. They literally give out badges on their belts that have their name on them that they make by the same guys who make badges for the police departments. And these guys are out there as IT support, but they're also representatives of the brand. And they thought through all these things because this is all free. If you're going to give uniforms anyway, why not make it an example of the brand? And then they thought, well, we have to have, when we're buying this many black shoes for an entire workforce, we can make the shoes look any way we want. And so they started to print their logo in reverse on the bottoms of their shoes, because they thought that for all those people walking on rainy streets, leaving imprints of the brand everywhere they went, that's a lot of gross rating points, and it's for free. You know, it's literally diamonds on the soles of their shoes. And I love them as an example, because in any brand or business you work on, there are types of opportunities that you can find ways to get free marketing that people will recognize and identify with. And if we look for those opportunities, we can have that point of difference. And if we don't have that point of difference, it can be a real issue. There's another quote, if you're not meaningfully unique, then you better be cheap. And in a growing category like this, there's no reason to be cheap. There's every reason to create value and then create the types of ideas that command that sort of value. And that brings us really to where we are today. This entire room, we're people with ideas, and we're about to go back and to go down an innovation funnel. And sometimes the innovation funnel looks like this. And it's funny because when products don't work, and most of the products launched into the world fail, organizations often respond by erecting tougher stage gates and putting more teeth into the process. And the challenge with that is that it doesn't necessarily result in better ideas. It results in survival of the safest ideas. And so it's a responsibility really of everyone in this room to go through that stage gate and to think about ways to not launch the safest ideas, but to launch the most remarkable ideas. And so that's the main thing I want to talk about today. I'm going to walk through 6 types of idea killers that can stand in the way of remarkable ideas. And then you've all probably noticed that they're big sheets of paper and markers at your table. I want to leave you today with one very instant tool that you can go back with that will instantly increase your chances of making your ideas come to life in powerful ways. And it's through the power of drawing, which I believe doodling is the simplest form of prototyping. And then if we all did more of it, our ideas would be communicated more strongly and exchanged more strongly. So we're going to get to that in a minute. So first thing that I think stands in the way, I think we often forget what we stand for. We often think about the products that we launch as a set of features and benefits. And then when it ends up in the world, consumers interact with these brands a little bit like this. But enough about me. What about you? What do you think of me? Where it's all about me, me, me. It's all about the features and benefits of this product and not how it really impacts the consumers in their lives. And if you really push companies to think about what you stand for, what is the why of what you do, you sometimes get a mission statement. And mission statements invariably look something like this. Guided by a heartfelt adjective focus on cliché, another cliché, and yet another cliché, we will strive to long-winded phrase, delivering big aspirational word to our vague group. There's a website, actually, that collects mission statements from companies and then takes the names out, and you can't tell who is who. And I think that's true with most businesses. We don't think about the why of what we do. When we do think about it, it can be incredibly powerful. And I'm going to give you an example from a brand all of you know, Nike. So Nike came up with a marketing campaign. They came up with an idea called the Chalkbot. They found a way to create a robot that could actually spray paint chalk on a road surface. And you can think about all the marketing opportunities for this. You could draw the world's longest swoosh. You could talk about all sorts of benefits about their clothing and everything. But the idea that they had instead was to connect Chalkbot to make it possible for anyone to create a message of cancer support and send it through a website, and Chalkbot would draw it on the route of the Tour de France. And then it would take a picture of that message and send it back to the person who left the message with GPS coordinates of where exactly that message fell on the route of the Tour de France. So you have the entire Tour de France filled with nothing but messages of cancer support, not a Nike swoosh to be seen. But you can imagine for those who'd come across this, not only is it meaningful to them, but it is a sign of what Nike stands for, that it's not about the bike, it's about you. And my first big message is for your ideas is that it's not about your organizations. It's about the consumers and what omega-3s enable them to do. And if we build in more of the why into our ideas, it can be incredibly powerful. And rather than organizations having Facebook pages that look like this, me, I spend hours on self-promotion comments, why doesn't anyone like me? Facebook must be broken. Instead of that, you have a world where people actually do want to hear from you because you stand for something meaningful in their lives. And omega-3 is such a powerful category and representation of that. And when consumers get that, it can be incredibly powerful. Another quote I find meaningful, that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And so bringing that through in the ideas that you launch is incredibly important. Okay, second big thing that stands in the way of remarkable innovation is leaving creativity at the brainstorm. And I touched on that in the intro, that often we find ourselves in these situations where we go away to be creative, and then we come back to be critical. But creativity, I would argue, is actually most needed when you go back into the head office, when you hit a hurdle and a setback, and you have to find a redirect or a course correction or another way to make things happen. Sometimes brainstormings look like this. Let's sing Kumbaya until the ideas come, and then we'll go back to our desks and come up with 100 reasons why they'll never, ever work in a million years. And the problem with that is that inevitably the ideas get smaller. When I worked at Method, we tried never to have a brainstorm, a traditional brainstorm. Instead, we made our entire office look like a brainstorm. Ideas were able to incubate and grow in real time. We had every vertical surface in the entire building outfitted with floor-to-ceiling magnetic whiteboards. We called it the wiki wall. And it let us put ideas up on the wall, and anybody in the entire organization could add them. No matter what their job function was, no matter what area of the company they worked in, they could all add to the ideas. We had a 3D printer that let us draw bottles overnight. So you have a sketch, you turn it to a CAD drawing, suddenly you're holding a bottle in your hand, and then putting it up on the wall and allowing people to add to it. And you end up with innovation cycles that look like this, just a series of long, very highly iterative prototypes that everybody in an organization had the ability to influence at each and every stage of the organization. And it doesn't mean that you can't apply critical thinking between this. In fact, you do it a lot. But you also add creativity. And this particular series of prototypes was for a new laundry detergent. And the laundry detergent initially started with a blank whiteboard. And somebody whose family had an equestrian ranch came back from holiday with a horse suppository and put a horse suppository on the wall because she liked the form factor of the horse suppository. A little strange, but the horse suppository ended up leading into an idea for a laundry detergent that would work like bath beads, little encapsulated beads. And we liked the idea, and we went down the path to concentrate a detergent far enough so that it would actually fit inside of a bath bead and still be strong enough. And that was an incredible challenge of chemistry because we had to do quite a lot to make it that powerful without dissolving the bead in which it sat. And we accomplished that and then got to the point as we achieved that initial feat and realized that it was far too expensive to ever launch. And so we found ourselves with a dilemma. And we could either shelve the idea, we could make the idea smaller, or what we ultimately did with the entire cross-functional team, as staring at this prototype that had failed, we thought, since we've made the formula this concentrated, is there a different form factor we can put it into? And ultimately, it led to a laundry detergent that uses more of a pump dispenser, like a shaving cream dispenser, which is also very different from the category. It's a lot less messy than the rest of the category. And while it's not the horse suppository form factor, it ended up being a remarkable idea and very successful. And it only would have been possible if the team was comfortable making a creative pivot in the middle of the innovation process. And too often that pivot doesn't quite happen that way. The idea gets shelved and then it's pushed aside and something more safer launches, something in a traditional bottle launches. And so thinking about ways to bring creativity into the process is very crucial. The third big thing I want to talk about is this idea of testing, and then launching big. And it's in any type of physical product production, you end up with 18-month, 2-year development cycles, a lot longer if there's a lot of scientific work involved. There are regulatory processes. And there are lots of reasons why all those steps exist. But often we feel one of the main drivers is market validation. We want to make sure that it's a big idea, and then we launch it really big. And you end up sometimes having very big failures. You end up sometimes trying to limit your risk of failure by talking to consumers, but talking to them less in a way to get real insight and more in a way to kind of CYA. And a lot of times market research looks a little bit like this. Oh, all-knowing focus group, tell me your unmet consumer needs so that we can create disruptive innovations for you. More promotions, yeah, make everything cheaper. The consumers don't always know what they want, and they can't always articulate it. And if we present ideas purely in some of these very structured ways, sometimes the best ideas get weeded out. Or it takes so long that you've lost the opportunity. You end up with a whole series of tests that you've checked the box on. We finally got through all the market research required to launch our new product, but we're retired now. and then you end up missing the opportunity. There are ways to think about this differently, and we certainly did at Method. I want to talk a little bit about a company called Beta Brand that approaches this in an entirely different way. So Beta Brand is a small clothing brand in San Francisco, just a couple $1 million in sales, handful of employees. And they looked at the world of clothing, and they saw a world of Gap and Banana Republic and J. Crew and companies that had big launches. They would basically launch a few seasonal lines in a really big way. And they decided to go at it entirely differently because they're such a small company. They decided they would launch a new idea every single week. And imagine what that would take, launching a new product every single week. And they would launch it in small batches. They would produce themselves close to their office. And if it did big, then they would scale up. Every single week they've launched a new product. And they've never lost money on a single product they've launched because they've kept the scale low. But it allowed them to take chances in market and to get things into people's hands rather than an artificial focus group. They got things in people's hands and they could figure it out if they worked. They came up, for instance, for Thanksgiving, they came up with the gluttony pants. And these are pants that have special buttons that unbutton over the course of your meal. And it's hard to tell with the lighting, but it goes from piglet to sow to boar by the time you're finished with your Thanksgiving meal. It came with its own napkin, and this never would have survived a focus group test. But it did phenomenally well. They have over 1,000 Facebook likes on this product alone. And one of the guys who liked this product was Conan O'Brien, and he talked about it in his opening monologue. So here's this little company in San Francisco with no marketing budget, just putting a remarkable idea out into the world quickly, and it worked. And people talked about it, and it kind of helped put them on the map. And then they thought, why don't we create products for each of the 7 deadly sins? So this was the Lust skirt, which had a skirt made of disco ball material. And my favorite was the Envy pants. They made only one pair of it, and they sold it by auction. This one was $910. But by putting it out quickly into the world, the market let them know what worked. You know, for 4th of July, they realized that the Independence Day pants worked quite well, as Stephen Colbert proved. And they thought, let's innovate on that one. And they launched very quickly with the Capron. And my point of this is that this is a tiny, tiny brand, and they're launching physical products. And while they don't have to deal with a lot of the constraints of bigger businesses, they do have to deal with some. And they find a way to get ideas out into the world quickly and then learn from them. It's very similar to what we see in high-tech development. This is a quote from the founder of WordPress. Usage is like oxygen for ideas. You can never fully anticipate how an audience is going to react to something you've created until it's out there. That means that every moment you're working on something without it being in the public, it's actually dying, deprived of the oxygen of the real world. And I think too many ideas are deprived of the oxygen of the real world. And if there are ways to launch things in a small way and get real market impact, you can learn quite a bit from that. And at Method, we did a ton of that. We realized that for the price of a billboard ad, we could actually build a temporary store off Union Square in San Francisco and give out bench sample products to consumers and see what they thought right there. Not ask them in a focus group behind a one-way mirror, but to actually see if they bought it. And that kind of stuff is really very powerful. Okay, fourth big thing that stands in the way of ideas is trying to appeal to everyone. Thinking of target markets as this. Who else should we target? Sometimes with the category and with big businesses, you think if you want to have a big business, you have to talk to everybody in the world. And the problem with trying to talk to everybody in the world is that by being blandly appealing to the great majority, you end up not being that meaningfully unique to anybody in particular. And that's a big way, I think, for organizations to start focusing on core audiences. At Method, the big lesson for me was a guy named Nathan, who doesn't work for Method, doesn't know anybody at Method personally, but on his own started a dedicated blog about Method called One Man's Unsuppressed Lust for All Things Method. A little creepy, very creepy, actually. But he updates it at least 3 times a week, and he usually gets at least 10 comments per post. And the reason that he'll create an entire blog on his own about Method is because Method talks to him in such a powerful way, he feels compelled to do that. And I would say if you can think about your ideas and the audiences for your ideas and focus far narrower than you think you should, you'll end up reaching such a powerful core of advocates that it'll then also spread to larger groups of people and can lead to a bigger brand phenomenon. But most importantly, you have these advocates who will go out there and market for you. And for every Nathan, we know there are lots of people who go out and spread the good word about Method just because the brand talks to them in a powerful and focused and unique way. Fifth big thing is following the rules of the category. And this is a big issue, particularly in an organization with the focus on a particular industry, like omega-3, because it's tempting to think of the category as the $2 billion ingredient category or $1.8 billion ingredient category. The big opportunity is to break outside of that and come into it with fresh eyes. How do consumers think about dietary habits in general? I want to talk a bit about an adjacent category, which is the world of sort of over-the-counter medication. There's a reason, I'm sure, why if you go to shop for headache medicine and you walk down an aisle, it looks like this. But if you ever have a headache and you're trying to just solve that problem, this can be so dizzying. There's a shopper decision tree and all sorts of reasons why every little sub-segmented category is part of that. But look how confused she looks. She's facing this array of products shouting at her and often all saying exactly the same thing, talking in terms of superlatives rather than something meaningfully differentiated and unique. And the world is so full of this types of clutter. And health claims often do this. It sounds like one thing over and over and over again, and it's often because of all the shouting, it's very hard to actually get a message across. It ends up being really, really tough to bring a meaningful point of difference. I was surprised in this category recently to come across a new brand that looks like this. They don't have 100 SKUs, they have 3. But yet, because of the simplicity, all it says is, help I have a headache, help I can't sleep, help I have an aching body. Dwayne Reed in New York gave them an entire dedicated end cap. Not because they not because they were friends with the brand owners, but because it made a statement at Dwayne Reed about what the category should look like. And these guys had a refreshingly new approach to a category that had existed for a long time. And what I think often happens in big organizations is we sometimes, with all of our institutional knowledge about the category, we develop blinders. All that knowledge can blind us to actually how consumers think about it. And there's an opportunity to look at our ideas with fresh perspective, a little bit of intelligent naivete, and strip away the things that are superfluous and take a fresh approach and a fresh look at it. And it's very hard to do. It's very hard to do, but very powerful when you do it. These guys are taking an entirely different approach to the category, and they're sort of looking at the rest of the category. Everyone likes to talk more bigger, faster, extra, super, ultra, and maximum, and they're going an entirely different way. That's the type of meaningfully different point of view that I talked about earlier, the point of difference that we all need to have in more of our ideas for them to really have that aha moment. Just for fun, they put on their design brief to this crowdsourced design website and asked these designers to develop their products using the rules of the category, and they came back with the product designs at the bottom. and looks just like everything else. And their point was, look how they've taken a different point of view on it. So there's a room, I think, in most categories to take that simplistic point of view, to take that point of view that helps make clarity out of a confusing category. And it's very powerful when done well. There's a video that circulated on the internet a couple of years ago called If Microsoft Redesigned the iPod Package. And it's fascinating because it talks about all the things that marketers do to screw up an initial idea sometimes. And on the left is the original idea, and the right was sort of the final product, and you have all these quotes from marketers. Don't forget the third-party endorsement. And what's most funny to me about this video is that it later surfaced that the video was actually created by the Microsoft design department. And they created it to show the marketing team what they were subjected to. And then it ended up going viral. I think somebody decided to put it on YouTube, and it sort of started to spread. But I think the lesson is there for all of us, that if we can go at a category with a refreshingly different point of view, it can be incredibly powerful to sort of rethink what the category actually is. When I was at General Mills, the CMO would often tell us that the smartest person on a brand team is the one who has just joined. And the first thing he encouraged us to do whenever we join a new project is not to look at all the category binders that we're going to inherit, and to start going to those immersion meetings, but instead, fill up a notebook with everything you think you know about the category before you've actually joined the brand team. And then that'll be the most powerful resource that you have. And I would encourage, I guess, within this industry to think about some of that intelligent naivete as well. Okay, the sixth big thing that stands in the way, and then we'll get into some drawing, is leaving marketing to the marketers. As I mentioned at the beginning, I see everybody in this room is working on the marketing team, no matter what your functional background. And it's incredibly powerful when you do that. When you don't do that, you end up with situations like this, where legal teams are often put in the position of red penning ideas rather than bringing them to life. And gatekeepers are created to provide a door for ideas to pass through and give yes-no decisions rather than actually be part of the idea process to begin with. And it can be incredibly powerful if you engage some of these gatekeepers to be part of your teams on day one, because the ideas will actually grow and spread and be made more powerful. There's a personal care brand called Axe, or it's known as Lynx in Europe and other parts of the world. And it's known for its very provocative marketing. And yet, it's part of Unilever. And I once got to know someone at Unilever, and he said that they all referred to the senior leaders and the gatekeepers at Unilever as the abominable no-men. And so I ended up meeting a brand manager for Axe, and I asked him, how are you able to get all this provocative marketing out the door without it getting squashed? And his answer was that he actually engaged the legal team early on to be part of the marketing team. And rather than show final ideas for red penning, he brought them in on day one and actually gave them a marker to actually help develop the idea. And he told a story that's very provocative about a new product they launched called the Axe Detailer, which is basically like a loofah for guys. And he knew that if he talked in just features and benefits, his audience would just roll their eyes. So they developed a 2-minute infomercial that featured some people scrubbing soccer balls and other things, and talking about the powerful, talking very tongue-in-cheek about the product without talking about the product. And I saw this and I was like, we couldn't even do this at Method. We were such a small company. How could you possibly get that idea out the door? And the legal team, as gatekeepers, helped create this idea. And then when it got a little bit further along, they ended up making it very successful. And it resulted not only in high sales numbers for this product, but in this brand team receiving an innovation award from Unilever. So they didn't just get squashed, they actually were given encouragement to take the idea further. And I would say that with all the regulatory challenges in this industry, the answer isn't to try to find ways to get around the gatekeepers. The answer is to work within those constraints so that the gatekeepers can help you find creative solutions to create meaningful messaging despite all the regulatory hurdles. Because often in organizations, it's very easy to put a pin in something. It's a lot harder to actually take something and make it stronger. And rather than operate in silos where it's easy to kind of point fingers, free range won't work. They're happier in separate pens when they can blame each other when things go wrong. Rather than create silos, empower everyone to see themselves as part of this larger marketing team. This picture is of the first Apple Macintosh. in 1985, if you'd bought an Apple Macintosh and ripped off the hood of it, on the inside, on the metal plate, you'd find the signatures of every single team member who helped bring it to life. And it's not just Steve Jobs or the senior people, it's every single person in the organization who helped make the idea happen. And think about that symbolically for a moment, signing your work before you actually ship a single unit, and the pride that everyone in the organization would take to make that idea actually stronger as a result of that. It's incredibly powerful. And I think there's room for more of that in any product. I found a box of Duncan Hines cake mix recently that had signatures on the bottom of the box where there's usually just some color strips and meaningless numbers. And I don't know the story behind it, but I can only imagine that those signatures related to the team members who touched the product, and they took it personally, and as a result, made it a lot stronger. Some of the best marketing ideas at Method didn't come from the marketing organization at all. It came from supply chain and other places. We had a supply chain director who set up the first ever logistics route between San Francisco and Los Angeles that ran on recycled biodiesel from restaurant oil. And the supply chain director realized that we could actually wrap the trucks of our third-party logistics provider without a lot of money. So we ended up wrapping the trucks with this messaging that was suddenly seen by everybody on that interstate. And then he got the idea that we had a big, important trade show coming up, and the booths were very expensive. And he came up with the idea of bringing the truck to the trade show. And rather than getting a booth, park the truck right in front of the entrance to the trade show and then just pay for the parking tickets. And the parking tickets was less expensive by far than the price of the booth, and a lot more impactful when you have an 18-wheeler to work with in terms of signage and bringing an idea to life. And the point of this, I guess, is ways to enable everybody in an organization to say yes and rather than yes but, and to find ways to make the ideas stronger and really resonate. I'm going to tell one quick story about this, then we're going to get into the drawing. This is a brand in Europe called Innocent. It's a smoothie brand. When I first arrived in the UK, I worked there for 3 years and returned just a number of years ago. I came across this brand, and walking down the stores, as I'm sure a lot of you do when you're in different countries looking at the categories, I was struck by the fact that all these bottles were wearing hats. And I couldn't figure it out. Why are these bottles wearing hats? And then I learned that there was a promotion that they were doing, that the hats were actually knitted by their consumers and sent in by the truckloads, and then they would place these hats on their bottles and then sell the bottles at full price and give 50p to an organization called Age Concern. And as I got to know the brand team a little bit more, I realized that they did this because they were fighting against Tropicana. And Tropicana had launched a trade war with lots of half-price promotions. Innocent couldn't possibly keep up with that type of spending. So they decided to execute a trade promotion that rather than give the money to the consumer at shelf, they would give the money to a good cause and create a marketing event out of it. And as a result, you end up with this phenomenon where the women who most directly benefited from this charity were knitting a lot of the hats, and then the hats were on shelf and the retailers were happy, and it became this virtuous circle of marketing. And often in the world of marketing, the trade promotions feel like something you have to do, and it's sort of a tax. But here's this trade promotion that actually turned into an amazing marketing experience, and it was only possible by everybody in an organization finding a way to say yes to this idea. Because you can imagine going into a logistics person in a factory and saying, okay, marketing idea, we're going to send lots of woolly hats. They're not all the same size. You need to open up every single case individually and apply the hats on every bottle. And it's only going to one retailer, and it has to arrive all at the same time, so you have a shelf that all has hats, and not some with hats and some not. I mean, there's so many ways to kill this idea. There's so many ways to kill this idea, but they didn't kill it because the organization and everybody on the team found a way to think of their jobs as working in marketing, and they overcame every single one of those hurdles. And as a result, this promotion ended up having a higher lift at shelf than if they had given the money away to consumers in terms of a discount. They sold more units at full value than if they had given it away at shelf. And that's really the power of marketing. But it's only possible if marketing isn't some fairy dust that you sprinkle at the end, but it's something that you think about all the way through. The head of creative at Innocent describes marketing describes Innocent as made up of thousands of nice little touches, which I think is such a wonderful description of what a brand is and what an idea is and what a product is. And so that's the main thing I want to leave you with today, is to think about everything that you do and the ideas that you launch as composed of thousands of nice little touches, and how do you inject that into your ideas more frequently. I'm going to transition quickly. We're going to get into some drawing because I believe this is one of the single most powerful ways to make sure that that magic happens where the ideas get stronger. So that you have, rather than death by 1,000 cuts, you have the process that the ideas actually get stronger. Often in business, I find that we communicate our ideas a little bit like this. Here's a remarkable idea rendered lifeless in 127 monochromatic slides. I'll read word by word for the next 90 minutes. And as a result, you sometimes lose your audience, and no surprise that ideas often don't have any staying power. A few years ago, I met the head of design for BMW, and he gave a talk, and I was amazed that when he gave a talk, he didn't have any flashy pictures of cars and lots of bullet points. Every single slide was nothing but stick figure drawings and a couple handwritten quotes. And he said he always communicated ideas that way because it was the only way he could communicate in a way that could be understood whether you were in a boardroom or on the factory floor, and that too many ideas fall apart in that communication stage. And so I think drawing is a very powerful way of doing this. And I want to start, before you unroll the paper at your table, I want to ask all of you just to grab a sheet of paper at your table and grab a marker or a pen, it doesn't matter what it is. And I just want to ask you to draw. We actually have the other version of the presentation that has the things on there to draw, if there's a way to pull that up. While we're teeing this up, I'm just curious, how many of them in this room like to draw? So this is pretty common. There are only a few. I went to my daughter's kindergarten class recently to teach cartooning, and I asked the kids who like to draw, and everyone jumped out of their chair enthusiastically. And something happens to adults that we forget that we once loved to draw as kids. Great. Okay. Now, what I want to ask you guys to do is to just very simply draw 9 squares that look something like this. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just leave a little bit of space around the 9 squares. No, just on a small piece of paper at your place. Not at the big piece of paper. Just a small piece of paper at your place. We'll get to the big piece of paper in just a second. Perfect. Okay, when you've drawn these 9 boxes, over top of the boxes, I just want you to draw a U, a line, and sort of a one-line rainbow. And then when you've done that, I want you to do the same thing along the side, a U, a line, and a one-line rainbow. And then within each box, I just want you to draw sort of 2 lines of a triangle. And then to the left and the right of the 2 lines, just draw dots. And you're already starting to see a face emerging. And then I want you to take the lines on the sides and kind of make that a bit of a smile line. So the U becomes a smile, flat line becomes straight, the upside down becomes a bit of a frown. And then I want you to take the top lines and make those the eyebrows. And what you find is that with just a couple simple marks, everyone in this room has just drawn 9 distinct human emotions. And if I'd asked you in words to describe 9 distinct human emotions, it might have taken you a while to name all 9 or to think about 9 and what's the nuance between the bottom one of the guy on the left and the guy on the right. But there's something there, and we process that visually. There's an incredible amount of information that we process visually. And we don't need to be Picasso to represent simple images. All we need is to doodle. And as kids, we all did this. But it's such a powerful way to communicate ideas. And here's something as abstract as emotion, and we're able to do that. I had the fortune last year of meeting this woman, Sunny Brown, who is a graphics facilitator. And she was at a big conference illustrating while they talked the ideas. And I looked at the notes I had taken, and even as a cartoonist, my notes still looked like they were written by a court stenographer. I write, I do bullet points, and then I put them away, and I never, ever look at them ever again. And I think sometimes we do that with ideas. We don't really process as we're getting them out. But as I got to know Sunny and got to know others in visual storytelling, I realized there are a lot of ways to communicate ideas. And there are a lot of ways to show them visually through drawing that can be very powerful and very memorable because it forces you to process the ideas while you're drawing them, and then they convey a different level of meaning to people when they're actually looking at them. And so there's some simple tools to visual storytelling I want to teach all of you today, because I think as you think about bringing ideas to life and constructing your own versions of wiki walls, however that may look, that's a powerful way to get ideas to life and bring people along with you. Because ideas aren't static, as I've tried to get across to you today. They're not static, and they can be watered down, but they can also be made richer and stronger by the virtues of all the diverse opinions in an organization and specialties that can make ideas stronger. But it's only powerful if everyone feels like they have the ability to add to an idea rather than red pen it. And so now what I want to ask you guys to do is to make space for the bigger sheet of paper and to kind of roll that out as best you can at your table and to stand up, actually, if you can, just so that you have a little bit of space to look at the big piece of paper. And while you're doing that, I want you to think about one idea that came out of the GoEd conference so far. And it could be an idea for something new. It can be an insight that you heard related to how consumers feel about things. It can be any idea under the sun, but it just needs to be an idea that if you go back to your organizations later this week or next week and somebody asks, how was that conference? It's one idea that you might like to share. And as you're thinking about that, I want you to think about, as you're rolling out the paper, think about how you might encapsulate that idea in a short sentence, 5 or 6 words, something like that, something that captures the gist of the idea. And then I'm going to ask you when you're ready, I'm going to walk through a simple visual storytelling of bringing that idea to life a little bit. Does it make sense to everybody? Great, so just roll out the paper and then kind of stand up so that you can all easily access it. It doesn't have to be perfect, and I apologize, there are glasses and things that may make it hard to move stuff around, but. Great. Okay, now what I want you guys to do while you're at your tables, I'm going to walk through, I just want to show a couple of very simple things, even when writing words. Because often when we write words, we default into our scratchy doctor's prescription handwriting that's illegible to everybody. But I want you to think about how to write the idea that you have in your mind in words that could be read if you were suddenly struck with laryngitis and had to wear it around your neck going to the office next week saying, here's an idea from GoEd. And rather than write it in the scratchy doctor's prescription handwriting, be deliberate about some of the letters and write it big enough so that you can stand back and kind of see it. And there's a simple guide from a friend of mine on drawing just as the simple word the. A couple simple lines, adding a little bit to the left and to the right, filling in the shading, and then that word the has a lot of impact. It's very simple. None of this is rocket science. But just write your idea in 5 or 6 words, sort of big enough to stand back and take a look at it, using the markers at your table, or if you have pens, it doesn't really matter. But take a moment to process it, and then write that just in front of you with a little bit of space around it, just looking at the words. And I'm going to show you how we're going to add to that in a second. Does that make sense to everybody? Start with words of an idea that you've gotten out of this conference, an idea, an insight. Good question. Not collaboratively as a table, just sort of individually in front of you, write down an individual insight or idea on the bigger piece of butcher paper. Yes, exactly. Right there, yeah, perfect. And just write it out so you can stand back and kind of see it collecting fish waste. Yeah, exactly. Oh, thanks for saying that. Everyone's drawing on it, but just take your own space right in front of you. Exactly, yeah. A good question on the butcher paper. You don't need to tear it or draw boxes for your idea. Just use all there's a lot of space on the paper. Just focus on a little bit in front of you and just write that sentence there. You'll see a number of different ideas per piece of paper, and we're going to add to those. But start with just looking right in front of you. Perfect, okay. While you're doing that, if some of you sort of finish up the idea in type, we're going to draw a person. And this is usually where people start to feel intimidated and start to say, I don't know how to draw. I'm going to walk through a very simple way just to draw a simple stick figure because it's powerful. And I want you to think of a person, whether it's the end user of your idea, whether it's a group of people that you may need to convince about your idea. Somehow when you look at the words on your page and you think of a person connected with that, if it's a process challenge, the team of that, start to think about a person or people. And sometimes for drawing, the first thing that people do when they draw a person is they often start with the head. And it sounds simple, but actually you don't want to do that. And the reason is that if you start with the head and then you start adding the body, if it has to bump up against anything in the page, you find yourself with these funny looking people, and then you convince yourself you can't do it. If you actually start with the body, a couple simple shapes, a few rectangles for the torsos, that alone can get across quite a lot of information. And then later you can add some simple lines for legs and feet, add the heads, add expressions. You can start to bring the people to life a little bit more. But at the simplest level, drawing a person is just a stick figure. And if you draw just a couple of shapes, that can make what you've written down even more powerful. There's a cartooning expression called text-image interdependence. And it means that the text always conveys some information, images convey information, but when you put the two together, the result is greater than the sum of its parts. So as you're looking at the idea that you've started to write in front of you, match the words with some type of person or people in either consuming the idea or somehow showing how they might interact with that idea. Yes, yeah, consumer could be, or it could be an organization that you're selling it to. It could be people around a table. It could be animal. Yes, exactly, yeah. Some figure, the point is to draw some character that is somehow interacting with your idea. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect, just something that sort of brings it to life. Feel free to include a product in their hands, something that they're interacting with. It's something that shows the idea and their relation to them. I imagine we might see lots of fish. That's good. And my big message on this is that it's not complicated. And stick figures don't have to be perfect. And a lot of what holds us up when we think about the idea of drawing is that somebody's going to laugh at the drawing, but it can be very, very simple. Yeah, great. Perfect. Okay. So while you're doing that, I'm going to add just a couple other things to think about when visual storytelling. This is sort of a crash course. There's 6 sort of main steps to visual storytelling, and we've talked about letters and we've talked about people. There are other ways to add to it, as graphic facilitators do, adding some bullets to sort of unpack the idea a little bit further, and not having to just draw bullets like it's in a Times New Roman font on a PowerPoint presentation, but actually drawing it to actually bring it to life a little bit more. Frames, adding frames around the idea that you've written, whether it's sort of written on a speech bubble or a thought bubble or something hanging on a wall, they can all convey different meaning on how you show words on a page. Adding in connectors so that if there's something that inspires another idea, you can draw an arrow so that it links to another idea is also very powerful. And then shadows is something you can start to add to the ideas to make certain pieces of information come off the page more than other pieces of information. And so again, this is a first sort of dry run, but as you're looking at this idea, and again, thinking, I have laryngitis, I'm going to the office next week, and I'm wearing something around my neck that represents an idea, think about these 6 different things and try to bring the idea to life a little bit more through drawing, through people, through some of these other props that are included in it. Does that make sense? Is there any questions on that? So just take a couple quick seconds. It's fairly quick, but something that sort of brings it to life. It could be both. The idea basically now is sort of composed of both a picture and an image. So you're kind of bringing the two together in a way. That can be a headline. It could be a thought bubble. It could be a title of the idea, and then the picture that you're drawing is representing the idea. It can go a lot of different ways when you're drawing something like this. But as you're doing it, hopefully you're feeling a little bit like it's a new way to sort of articulate it. Maybe take another 20 seconds just to bring it to life just a little bit more, and then reach sort of a pausing point. Perfect. And now what I want you guys to do when you're ready is stand up, and I want you guys to move to an entirely different part of the room for a few minutes. And as you're walking, kind of take a look a little bit of how things are emerging on paper. And then when you're ready, find yourself at a new place in front of somebody else's idea, and then just take a second to sort of take something from what you've seen. And along the way, you'll find totally different approaches that people took and how they brought their ideas to life. Just sort of take a mental note about that. And I want you to kind of look at the idea that wherever you land in front of and see what you get out of that. And it may be different than what was originally intended. And that's okay. You know, this is the first time sort of doing this. But actually, it's all part of the idea exchange part of the equation, that ideas aren't static. They're added to by those who look at the idea and find different interpretations. What I'm trying to replicate a little bit here is that wiki wall experience where you're walking down a whiteboard and there's something written up there and you don't have all the background for it, but you kind of know the industry enough to take some meaning from it. So find yourself in front of some other idea. Great. And so take another 20 seconds or so to find a new spot, different part of the room than where you were standing before. Maybe, hopefully with maybe different people than you were sitting with before, so you have a little bit of different surroundings. And then when you find yourself at your new spot, just look at all the ideas on the big sheet of paper. They will not, many of them won't relate to each other. Some might. But look at the big piece of paper sort of in its entirety. And then what I want to ask you to do when you get to a new place and you're seeing the ideas in front of you, I want you to add another idea to that piece of paper. And this time, kind of draw it all together, the headline, the picture, these 6 fundamentals that I sort of walked through a minute ago, sort of draw them all together to articulate another idea. And this can be an idea, something else new you were thinking about from the last couple of days. It could be something inspired by what you see on the piece of paper, and maybe you connect it. It could be something that it made you think of just when you were walking around the room and you saw ideas sort of shown in this sort of way. But something related to omega-3 with another idea. When you're ready, just fill in some of the white space on a piece of paper. Start to bring another idea sort of to life. Yes, write on somebody else's. And you can add to their idea, or you can write something new in the white space near an idea. And you'll probably see ideas that are end product ideas. You're probably thinking about ideas that are process. You're probably thinking about different ways to sell into an organization. There are lots of different types of ideas, and it's good to have that diversity. So take maybe another 90 seconds just to bring an idea to life. Again, it can be pretty rough. Okay, now I want you guys to move one last time to a different part of the room, and you'll see paper with some with more white space than others, and just add a third idea, just like we just did. Then what I want to ask you guys to do is, if you can, lift up the piece of paper wherever you are, and kind of tilt it around so that others sort of can see the paper. So we're all sort of holding up the sheets wherever you are. Great. Perfect. So what we're kind of seeing here is sort of one big tapestry of ideas that have sort of bubbled up over the last couple of days. And yes, they're raw, and they're not formatted in the right way, and there's spelling mistakes, and it's rough. But my main point is that drawing is a bit of a metaphor for innovation. The idea process should be messy and chaotic like this, and ideas should have the potential and ability to evolve, and everybody in an organization should have the ability to add to it. And that there are a lot of different ways to communicate ideas. And ideas are only as strong as how they're received by some type of an audience, whether it's within your organization or all the way through. And thinking about the story at the beginning is vitally and crucially important. Because as we started off, you may have invented the new mousetrap, but the world is not going to be the path to your door unless, one, it truly is a remarkable mousetrap, and two, you found a way to tell that story. And the message in drawing, I think, is in drawing ideas and communicating in a different way, but also finding the ability to see other ideas and thinking about how to add to them rather than necessarily how to look at some of the things, right? Rather than purely having a critical mind. It's about having the creative mind in addition to the critical all the way through the process. So anyway, thank you very much. It's been a really wonderful morning to spend with you. And if you're interested in any of the cartoons, I have marketunist.com. I send out a cartoon making fun of things every Monday, and you may recognize some things I've picked up from the last couple of days in the next few. Thank you.